This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so starting the recording 15 minutes late, we've already had our discussion on the home inspection situation that I was talking about, in which the listing agent provided our buyer's agent with a copy of the inspection report that we didn't ask for, and we terminated based upon that inspection report rather than doing our own. So that's the scenario. If anyone has questions when they're reviewing this recording about what we're talking about, please give me a call. I'll be happy to talk about that. I'm just not going to do it again. So now moving on to the next topic, that is the gist of what we really wanted to talk about today, is home inspectors and home appraisals. So I had a request from one of our brokers to talk about almost what I would call horror stories connected with home inspections. And in case, a couple of things here. We had a situation, I guess, when an inspector left 4 gas burners on for 4 days. That is shocking. An inspector that didn't locate and inspect the 4th attic and said the seller needed to cut an area in the ceiling drywall to allow access to the converted garage. Didn't, I guess, locate and find it. Also, an inspector, this happened recently, that said in brand new construction there was not enough clearance for ingress egress in upstairs 2-bedroom windows, and this is in a subdivision in which plenty of other homes had already been built and people had moved into it, and obviously built it with the same setup because it was a plan that they had used multiple times, and you know, obviously caused a huge red flag for us. And then also an inspector that is actually giving critical critique regarding the house plan, saying that the house is weird and saying it's funky, has an odd layout, and talking like that to the buyer, which is really interesting too. So I'd like to ask you guys, do you have other situations like this? And if so, how have you handled scenarios in which inspectors make some really odd things, obviously make mistakes? I mean, leaving gas burners on for 4 days, that is obviously a huge issue. They could have burned the house down. I also wonder why in the world did the listing agent not go back and check the house after the home inspection was done, just to make sure everything was the way it should be. Anyone have questions or have comments about any of this stuff? Can you share stories yourself? Yeah, yes, Katie.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, you just mentioned why wouldn't the listing agent go back and make sure the house was all, you know, buttoned up. I did have a buyer ask me, I mean, who's liable in that situation if we are representing the buyers and the buyers hire the home inspector, they come in, the home inspector leaves something on or leaves something running. At that point, who would be responsible for whatever happened? Would it be me representing the buyers, or would it be the listing agent who's representing the seller?
That's a great question, Katie. Or would it be the inspector? We have, our brokerage has liability insurance that will protect us from a lot of situations like this. If we ended up getting sued on something, say our buyer's home inspector, which we probably would have been the one to open the door for the home inspector to let them in, leaves the gas burners on and the house burns down, and it's determined this is what happened. We do have liability insurance. I would think the seller's home insurance policy would also go into effect. This is something that would have to be decided and determined by the different insurance companies. But really great question. I know that home inspectors also, at least they should be carrying liability insurance. They are certified contractors with the CCB. In order to have a home inspector's license, you have to be a licensed contractor to do that work. And so they do have a bond and insurance policy on file with the CCB. However, in the event there's a serious breach of something, they should have their own insurance. I mean, their insurance should protect them against any sort of claims. But from our perspective, know that when there is something serious that happens to a home, whoever is hurt by it will basically sue everybody, you know. So that's why it's really important that we do and I do an annual review on our insurance just to make sure we're covered, which is why when we got to a point of really having cyber issues, and that became not that we had cyber issues, but when we as a general industry started having situations with wire fraud scenarios and cyber problems, that I made sure we have an endorsement added to our E&O policy to include cyber. That's just for general protection for all of us. And it's something that we need to be really careful about. I've heard a horror story about one broker in the Portland area who let their E&O insurance lapse and then had a claim against them that resulted in a $300,000 judgment against that broker. And without E&O insurance to cover, she was on the hook for that. And so that's a major issue. So really good question there, Katie. I hope I answered that. Who's liable? I mean, that would be up to the insurance companies to determine, but that's why we have insurance. Other stories anybody has regarding frightening home inspection issues or scenarios that you're willing to share, or times in which home inspectors made some real serious mistakes? And how do we go through that? Yeah, Sherry?
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily a mistake, but so I contacted an inspector on short notice, and buyers used twice. I think because he gives a discount through the VA. Each time the inspector, I think I had him do the 3 because 2 were buyer.
Sherry, I can't hear you. I'm assuming. Can you get closer to your microphone?
Okay, hold on for a second. Let's see. How's this?
A little better.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. Maybe the mic is covered? No. Can you hear me at all?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's just a little muffled.
Okay. I think that's the best it's going to get right now.
Okay.
Anyway, so I contacted an inspector on short notice. The buyers had used twice before because I think he gives a VA discount. But each time the inspector, he would solicit the buyer to use him to either buy like a manufactured home or do a remodel of a home or use his lender. He would, instead of purchasing, I think, the home that he was inspecting, so he'd walk very closely to the buyers. Most when I wasn't in view, whisper in their ears about how much, better options he had available. And meanwhile, the inspection would take a lot longer, probably up to 4 hours, because he kept talking about, he was soliciting them. And then after the inspection, the buyers terminated the purchase because there were some cracks on the sidewalk or driveway. So, did you hear that?
Yeah, I couldn't grasp a lot of what you said there. It was something about a VA inspector who was talking a lot and trying to solicit more business.
Yes. Yes, he did manufactured homes, but he also did remodeling on the side. So there was a conflict of interest. But
so he was trying. He was trying to solicit work for himself. So did you get the impression from being a contractor or as well as in a home inspector?
Yeah, and I don't know if he was trying to take them off of the home that he was inspecting. That's what I thought I heard, to buy a manufactured home, which is less expensive.
Okay, so you got the impression. Did you get the impression at all that he was pointing out issues that maybe not be a real legitimate home inspection issue?
I think he inflamed or made the cracks in the sidewalk, which, expansion and contraction, it's pretty normal. A lot of the sidewalk driveways do have cracks, but he put the fear in the buyer, and so they terminated. That's what I think. Yeah, but he does that on every inspection, at least the 3 hours. He'll get really close and he whispers and he keeps talking to them about how great manufactured homes are. you know, it's cheaper, it's a better deal, he could get them. Yeah.
And that truly is not the job of a home inspector. The job of a home inspector is to point out things that are a concern. So people are aware that there may be an issue connected with this. They have so many things written into the reports that give them outs. Realize we're not experts in this. Buyers should consult with an expert. You know, say they point out a roofing issue, they always say we're not an expert. They should consult with a licensed roofer. I mean, those are a lot of the things you will see in a home inspection report that really will protect the home inspector from future liability. And Sherry, what you're saying here too, I have seen this as well. I have shared this story with some people, but I will share it again. I can remember a long time ago when EIFS became an issue. And if you guys don't know what EIFS is, it's that stucco-like product that goes onto the exterior of some buildings. It looks like stucco, but it's really not stucco. It's a product that, if applied appropriately, is a great siding for a home or for a building. But if installed incorrectly, can lead to moisture penetration and ultimately a lot of problems with water getting under the EIFS and into the wood that frames the house, and can cause a lot of problems.
Because I can't you can't hear me that well.
EIFS is one of those issues that can be problematic. And in this case, quite a few years ago, we represented a seller who had a lot of EIFS on his house. This was a beautiful home up on Aubrey View, and the style of the house, EIFS was the proper product that was used to finish the exterior of the house. So it had a lot of EIFS on it. The homeowner knew there were problems with EIFS, had learned about that, and it had a full inspection by an expert in EIFS. Had a full report producing this EIFS was applied absolutely correctly. There is no issue with this. It's a lovely home, and all the tests they had done said it was in great shape. Well, we got the house in contract, and a home inspector came in who wrote a report about the EIFS, outlined everything in red letters, saying this is a horrible product. This is all the issues connected with EIFS. It's just a terrible thing. It's going to fail. There's going to be tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage, and any buyer who purchases a home like this is just crazy. It scared the buyer, obviously, and the buyer terminated based on home inspection. That was not the place of the home inspector to do this. They were to note that the home had EIFS as an exterior siding, and there have been problems in the past, but it should be something that the buyer should investigate with an expert. And obviously our seller already had done that. So it was a non-issue that became an issue, and we had a home sale fail as a result of that. And that was not the role of that home inspector to write everything up in red and talk about what a horrible product it was. And that's the thing that I think can be really an issue. Anyone else have stories like that or anything else that they want to talk about? Because obviously going forward, we never recommended that home inspector again, never. And anytime I would ever see a deal in which the other side was using that home inspector, I was always really, okay, let's see what else this person's going to point out that could be a problem. You utilize a home inspector who gives information but doesn't scare somebody. So I can think of being at a home inspection another time a few years ago, and this was done exactly the correct way. If you guys know what a ballard is that metal post that goes into the cement of a garage that keeps a car from crashing into the hot water heater, or say the heater that might be in the garage. It's a metal post that goes in it's cemented into the concrete, and it's there for protection. It's a fairly recent requirement in new construction, having that post there. But homes that were built in the 80s, early 90s, they were built prior to a time in which bollards were required. And the thing that I thought was so well done with this home inspection is the way the home inspector wrote up his report. He said that the home does not have a ballard in the garage. And at the point of time when this home was built, it was not required by code. But it might be something that the buyer may want to consider putting in, because it is a protective device to keep any car from crashing into, the HVAC system. And the way it was written, it was informational. The buyer took it and said, yeah, that's a great idea. It's not a fault. It's not an inspection issue from us to ask the seller to take care of, because it's not a repair thing, but it was informational. And moving forward, we closed successfully on that home, and the buyer put the ballard into the garage on his own. And it was a wonderful thing. And that inspector was by far my very favorite inspector that had ever dealt with. And unfortunately, he moved. But people here, I know, have other inspectors that they really appreciate using, who point things out without frightening a buyer and not killing a deal. Does anyone else have stories about home inspectors that they think would be helpful to share, both positive and negative? Any stories like that?
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, Sherry.
Okay. Now, this happened when I was a broker out of state, but and I was told this, the one home inspector had a reputation. He gives a discount to Microsoft workers, but he's very proud of the fact that he hates real estate agents, but he'll purposely find something and self-fear and kill the deal.
Why would he do that?
He hates agents. I don't know.
But we're the ones who refer our clients to these inspectors. Why would he cut off the source of his business? I don't get that.
He had a lot of referrals from the corporation. So.
From the corporation, so he was getting referrals differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't understand. Yeah, I wouldn't understand anyone who wants to say Microsoft goes another direction, and then if he's alienated the agents who most people rely upon to provide with names of home inspectors, he's hurting any other potential business he might get. I don't get that, but that might happen. I'm sure it does. Yeah. Any other questions regarding home inspections or stories that you've had regarding home inspectors that might have created scenarios or situations for you? Any positive stories anyone has? Okay. Okay, if not, then let's move on to appraisals. We've had some situations, and I did share that last week, about a couple of properties in which the appraisals that came in didn't match the sales price. And the concern you have when you waive the home appraisal and whether or not the buyer is risking their earnest money. I'm seeing more and more when we review contracts that people are really almost expected now when you're financing a property. If you want your offer to be considered, the listing agent is saying, are you going to waive the appraisal? And I'm hearing these stories quite a bit from our buyer's agents. Again, if they're financing, are they willing to do it? And that's of concern. And I've counseled a lot of people recently is, can your buyer waive the appraisal, come up with the extra cash, say $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, and still qualify for their loan? That's a real serious thing to consider, because their loan to debt ratio will change if they have to put out additional cash to purchase a property in order to move forward. And will they still be able to get their loan? I'm having people, seriously, when you get to a situation like that, you need to be working with your lender to find out how much could they actually come up with in additional cash funds to buy the property and still get their loan. And also from a buyer's perspective, do you really want to put that kind of cash down over what an expert is saying the home is actually worth? Do you want to overpay for a property? Does anyone have comments about that? Because this is becoming kind of the norm in our market. I'm having a number of people write into their offer, and this seems to be working, that the buyer is willing to pay up to $10,000 over the agreed to sales, over the appraised value, as far as a waiver of the appraisal, but only up to a certain figure. That seems to be working. Yeah, Colleen?
Oh, I was just going to ask, in those two instances, did the buyer or the listing agent, any agent, go and meet the appraisal, and how valid did they think the appraisal was? Did they think he was off, or did they think he was true? And did they meet with him?
That's a great question. That's one reason why I always suggest that when you are the listing agent, you always meet the appraiser. I always suggest as well, once you've finished your home inspection, pull the lockbox off the property so that the only way the appraiser can access the property is through contacting the listing agent and getting access that way. That way they have to talk with you. They can't come in on their own time. You have to meet them out there and give them access. And then you can go in there and show them your comps. A good appraiser would be very receptive to listen to the listing agent and show them and take whatever documentation the listing agent has. It said, did you see this comp? Did you see this comp? And by the way, we had 10 offers on the property, and we had 5 of them cash, and 5 of them financed. And we went with this financed offer because it was close to the cash offers, but it was still a better offer as far as the terms for my seller, and that's why we went with this. I mean, giving the appraiser as much information as possible to show why the price that was agreed to was justified. That really, really helps the appraiser come on and be able to validate the agreed to sales price. So yes, Colleen, that I think is really, really important. And last week we actually had Casey say that, hey, we as buyer's agent will often meet the appraiser. And I had not heard of anyone doing that from a buyer's perspective. I asked her, how do they go about doing that? And she said, well, we always call the listing agent, ask, would you mind if we met the appraiser? Because the appraiser will call the listing agent for access. They don't necessarily call the buyer's agent. But she said, when we meet the appraiser, because the listing agent said, oh yeah, that's great, go ahead, go for it. And then they can show their comps. They obviously don't have information on how many offers came in or what the offers were that the listing agent would. So really the listing agent is the one who should do it. But hey, if they're not doing it, you should ask as a buyer's agent, can I do it? Yeah, Colleen?
Well, you told me years ago you should always meet with the appraiser, and I've never forgotten that. So I do thank you for that advice. And I recently had this very small condo up at the end of the 7th Mountain that it was hard to get comps for. It was only 484 square feet, and I was struggling finding any comparables. So I called another appraiser who had called me for information to get his take on it and to get his advice. And he was telling me to go back even 10 years ago and look at the difference in the prices between the very small one and the big one, and then to use that, which I did. So I met the appraiser, that was this year, and the appraiser was like, I've never seen anything so small. He said, I'm going to have to go to Sun River. And I said, Sun River doesn't even equate with big, condos. But I had this information to provide him, and I think it really helped because it appraised. And hopefully he didn't go to Sun River, but it was just kind of a learning experience for me. And I was thankful that I had talked to that other appraiser and gotten a tip from him. So
that's a great story. Thanks, Colleen. That's really helpful information. And boy, doing a kind of like, this is what it was 10 years ago or whatever it was, the difference between a small and a large one, whatever you can come up with, and that's using those same statistics to project based upon recent sales for larger units. This is what a smaller unit should be worth. I think that's a great idea, and getting that advice from an appraiser, that helps a lot. Yeah.
Lene, I had a quick
Julie?
question, just because I'm new to this. So other than having those comps and as the listing agent being able to talk to the appraiser about the offers that you've been getting, is there any other information that people try to prepare for when they're going to meet an appraisal or an appraiser?
Yes. Some of the features of the home. For instance, appraisers have access to the same MLS that we do. So they're also realtors, believe it or not. They have to go through code of ethics training and all that stuff as well. But they have information that we do, but sometimes they don't really read everything as well as they should. They're really busy. There's a backlog for appraisers right now, and they're trying to get as many done as they possibly can to kind of meet that. So making sure that they're aware on this property. By the way, were you aware that this kitchen had been remodeled last year, and these are all brand new appliances? There's added value to this. Meeting them and telling them about the features of the home. They make mistakes too. There was a time a few years ago in which we were representing a seller on acreage property, and this was probably 10 acres. It had a couple of ponds on it. It had the house. It had a barn, outbuildings, various things. It was a nice property. It was a high-priced sale. The appraiser, our agent, was out of town, but our seller was there, and our seller was going to meet the appraiser and walk her through the property, because the appraiser was a woman. And the appraiser showed up, only spent about 10 minutes and left. And then the home did not appraise. And we asked, because we're the listing side, we asked for a copy of the appraisal from the buyer. The buyer gave it to us. And then we looked at, there's mistakes here. The appraiser, first of all, spent only 10 minutes, did not walk the property, when we were asked, well, why did these were the comps you used, but you did not give us credit for the property, the full credit for this other good comp that you had pulled out. And she said, well, that one has 2 ponds. And we said, our property has 2 ponds too. You didn't walk the property. You didn't see the fact that there were 2 ponds. And so she recognized she had made a mistake. This doesn't happen very often. She adjusted her appraisal to correct those errors that she had made. So yes, it's important to point out certain really nice features about the property. Say you're going into the barn, say, by the way, we have a full office connected with the barn. Go through this door, see this full office with the bathroom, all these different things that we have connected with the property. Or in a house itself, talk about the features. Say, this is a full wood floor, it's not laminate. We recognize this. These are upgraded faucets, talk about them being like growy faucets or whatever they are. So the things that you know about the home that may not necessarily be in the listing, or that the appraiser may not take the time to really note. It's important for you as a listing agent to point out, yes, the comps for the property, but also the features that make that property worth what it is. Hope that answers your questions on that. Yeah, great. Okay. Any other people have stories about appraisals and situations connected with that? Okay.
Hi, Linnea. I can piggyback onto that story. So last week I had an appraiser who I sent my comps to, and I said it's farm property, and so I'd like to walk it with you so you don't miss anything. And he said, I'm really busy. He didn't want to meet with me. So I said, okay, what's your email address? I'll send you some notes then. So I sent him the property features and my comps, because our multiple offers are way above market value. So I was afraid it would not appraise. So he never confirmed receiving my comps or my email, said he could get in the house on his own. So I love your advice to remove the lockbox.
Mhm.
And the last day, the night before his report was due, he called me in a panic to say, "Oh my God, I'm writing up the report. And I just saw an aerial map of yours, and there's a barn on the property." And I said, "Yeah, if you would have read my email under property features and the attached MLS full sheet, you would have seen that there was a barn on the property." So they're so busy now that even if you do old school, meet them, talk to them, or whatever, they're really not listening. And so he didn't listen, had to go back and go through the barn, that he didn't take the time to walk the property and even know that behind the trees there was a barn. So that's
Yeah.
what's going on right now a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good story. Thanks, Diane. And I'm glad he called you and admitted he had made a mistake. Did the property appraise?
It did, but yeah, I think
Excellent.
only due to embarrassment. So I'm so glad he did admit it too.
Well, that's good. And I'm glad he didn't have to go back and correct his error.
Yeah.
In our situation, that's hard because in some cases, lenders will not accept a corrected appraisal. There are times we're faced with that. It's like, you won't accept this corrected appraisal. The appraiser admits they made a mistake and they say, nope, we're only going to go with the first one that they gave. And that can create a lot of issues. Yeah. Yeah, Holly, you had undone your mic too.
Yeah, I had a situation with an appraiser in February, and it was actually with a client who was refinancing and trying to refinance and get the mortgage insurance off of his loan. And so, you know, I went and helped him get his house cleaned and staged and everything for the appraiser, and met with him, gave him comps, and walked him through the house and showed all the, you know, pertinent details, et cetera. And a few weeks later, the lender got back to my client and said, "Oh, the house appraised for 400." And I about spit out my coffee when I heard that, because I thought there aren't any houses that, you know, that are selling at 400 with the square footage that he had, and the location, and the house was built in 2016. I mean, it was, you know, I thought, well, that is wrong. So I asked to see a copy of the appraisal. I went through it, and there were so many mistakes and bad comps. And so I just wrote up a whole thing and talked to the lender and everything. And they went back to the appraiser, and he said, "Oh, sorry, you know, I did mess that up." And it ended up appraising for 440, and he was able to drop his mortgage insurance. So I think when you know, make the effort to try and get them to re-look at things when they make mistakes, that it ends up being worth it for your client in the end.
That's a great story, Holly. And I'm glad in that case the appraiser was willing to admit their mistakes. As Diane said, they're super busy, and they're trying to get through a lot of appraisals as quickly as they can, and they do make mistakes. They're human beings. So the more we can do as the real estate professionals to make their jobs easier by providing them with comps, providing them with information, and then we have to rely upon them that they actually take that information. So Diane, that was a great story that you gave us about how the appraiser admitted that he didn't look at your email, but he was willing to, after the fact, take that information in as he was doing his final report. And
yeah,
great story, Holly.
I thought it was interesting that he didn't use the comps that I had given him in the first place, because I researched the heck out of them, you know. So
yeah.
I thought that was interesting. But
that is interesting. And I know when I've met appraisers, I will show them my comps, and they say, "Do you have comps that I don't have?" Because I will show them, said, "Oh, I have that one, I have that," because they usually have done a little bit of research themselves before they actually come to the property. But they say, "I like anything else that you may have that I could use that I didn't see initially.
Right.
That's also, there you can look at MLS, but there's also stuff that's off market too. So you can always look at CRS, the CRS information that's part of our MLS. There's that additional, that's the courthouse retrieval system, CRS data. You can pull up comps on there of properties that never went into MLS. Sometimes that can be helpful too for odd properties, things that are, it records sales of properties that never were in MLS. And you can do CMAs on CRS data as well. And RPR too. RPR can also provide information. And the thing is, I don't believe that appraisers have access to RPR information. So that is another one that you could use. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else have information on this, appraisals and more on inspections or anything like that? Okay, if not, I have one more thing I really wanted to go over before we're done today, because I know we might have a little more time here. So this is the thing I wanted to pop up, and this is what is it popping in here? Yeah, here we go. The buyer's contingent right to purchase addendum. It's a little complicated. I was going over this with a broker yesterday. We're not getting a lot of contingent offers right now with this market. We're just not, because obviously they're weaker offers in a multiple offer bidding war situation. If the buyer has to sell a property, this is when this document is used. The buyer has to close on a property to move forward on their purchase, or at least they want to close on a property in order to move forward on their purchase. So it just so happened that we have a property that's been on the market for a bit, and the first offer we received was one that's contingent upon them closing on property to move forward. The rest of the offer was great, because usually when you're writing these sort of things, you want to make the rest of your offer as strong as possible. Full price, terms that will work well for the seller, all that sort of stuff. But if the buyer can't perform unless they sell their property, this document is used. In this case, it came in with the offer. If it doesn't come in with the offer and the buyer has identified in the financing terms they have to sell a house in order to perform, I would recommend a counter offer be written by the seller if they're willing to accept that offer, incorporating this document into the contract. So again, the contingency is upon the sale and closing of the property, and then you note the status. It's located, it's either listed for sale or will be listed for sale within so many days. And that's basically what this is used for. It basically gives the buyer information that says, yeah, we know you've got to sell your property in order to perform. But we also can bump you. So it says here MLS status. Prior to buyer's delivery, I've noticed that they're no longer, that they are removing the contingency. It's going to remain on market in bumpable status. So in other words, we can accept an offer like this. We're going to be having to change our MLS to note it is contingent, active with contingency. That's the status we have in Flex now, active with contingency. When people pull up active listings, our property will show, even if there has a contingency in there. So what happens, the way this whole process works is if we have a deal in which this addendum is incorporated, and during the term of time of escrow of this deal, our seller gets another offer. Then the seller will send this contingent right to purchase notice to the buyer. Basically says, hey, we've got another offer on the property. And now we're letting you know that you now have a very short period of time to remove your contingency. So the time to remove the contingency is already identified in here. So the seller's receipt, it shows how long you are giving them to respond to that contingency. But you're giving them this notice. Now the buyer responds by either saying, well, we now have an offer on our property, the buyer's property, and we're going to keep you informed of how our transaction goes forward on that. And we're in good shape. And now, because we have our offer on our property, you make the property that we're buying in pending status. Or alternative two, they've listed the property, we don't have an accepted offer, but we're going to go ahead and remove all of our contingency anyway, because we have cash that we can rely upon, or we have another means of financing our purchase. Or we're going to terminate because we can't perform. And if we terminate, all of our earnest money goes back to us. So that is, this notice goes out. This is the buyer picks their choice. It's either alternative one, alternative two, or alternative three, which is the termination. And then the seller moves forward. If, however, during the term of the contingency, the buyer gets an offer on their property, then they send this notice to the seller saying that the buyer has accepted an offer on the buyer's property and agrees to keep the seller timely informed of all material developments of the transaction relating to buyer's ability to meet the contingency. Or, here's the other thing, they can say, alternative two, we've listed our property, but we don't have an offer on it, but we're going to go ahead and remove the contingency on the sale anyway because we now have cash to buy, or what other reason. So these are the notices that are used in conjunction with this addendum. Does anyone have questions on this? We used these notices a lot when we didn't have such a strong seller's market and sellers were willing to accept a contingent purchase. Starting to see a few of these again. I always say that if a seller is willing to consider a contingent purchase, usually consulting with the agent who is going to be listing that buyer's property is really helpful. And if the buyer provides that information, as a listing agent, I would ask for that information because I want to talk to the agent who's representing that buyer on their sale to find out what the market's like, to find out how aggressively that buyer is listing their property in order to get this deal together. So questions on this. These sometimes become a house of cards in which you're willing to accept an offer contingent upon the sale of the property. Usually when we're doing that, the buyer's house is already in contract. In this market right now, the buyer's house is already in contract, scheduled to close, through inspections, and we're just waiting for the final little bit of escrow for the loan docs to be drawn up and for the buyer's buyer to close on that property. But every now and then we have a situation which I call the house of cards, in which the buyer's sale is contingent upon their buyer selling a property. So we're talking a sale, a sale, a sale. And we're supposed to disclose that, by the way. If we happen to know that the buyer's buyer can't close unless their house closes, that needs to be disclosed to any property, to any listing agent that we are asking to accept our offer. It's a contingent on a contingency. And if that house of cards falls, the whole thing falls, unless someone can bring it together. So questions on this document? Because we're going to be seeing these again as we get back into a less strong seller's market. And this, I'm starting to see some signs of that. Every now and then I'll see more listings hitting the market than we have going pending. Yesterday wasn't that case. We had far more pendings than we had new listings, but moving into Memorial Day and moving into summer when we have peak selling season, and the trends are showing, and the experts are also saying that they believe the second half of the year we're going to have more inventory as people feel more confident, people willing to have vaccinations, getting through the pandemic and feeling more confident and comfortable to be selling their homes. Questions on these things? Anyone? Okay, haves or wants? Anyone have haves or wants? I'm seeing a lot of wants right now. Yes, Tammy, thanks for this. Tammy has a comment here. I used to put in my counter offer on offers that had a contingency on a unlisted house that we wanted to approve the listing. also specifying that they could not take a contingent offer on their home unless we approve the conditions. That's really good. That's good verbiage to use, absolutely. That's a good idea. Okay, anybody questions or haves or wants? We're having new listings coming on board, which I'm really excited about. Yeah, Sherry, did you have a question? Yeah.
Isn't that in the contingent form where it says that you cannot take you have to have a purchaser that is non-contingent?
Yes, it basically says that the buyer, and this is coming from our seller, from the seller, that the buyer cannot accept a contingent offer on their sale unless our seller approves that. So that is.
I thought that was in this form on the bottom there.
It is. It says right here on line 35, buyer may not accept a written offer that is contingent upon the occurrence of another sale closing without seller's advance written consent.
Yeah.
So in other words, yeah, the seller has to approve if we know that the contingent.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Or has or wants anything? Okay, if not, thank you everybody. We're here in the office. We've got a bunch of new listings coming on board, which I'm super excited about. And let's keep it going. Thanks so much. Talk to everybody soon.